At this point, you should be already an expert on the brain organization, on this very basic terminology. And also you should know that the brain has some protection, some mechanisms. So the cranial bones are protecting it. The meninges are also absorbing any mechanical problem. In addition to that, the blood supply also is not as simple as we thought. So you have these uh, blood brain barriers that are very important. And we talk about this CSF that is also fundamental. That it again is slightly different from all the other body parts. Now we're going to move into the brain stem. So we're going to talk about what happened here between the spinal cord and the cerebrum. All these different structures that are located here, and we're going to describe each one of those, the location, the different cranial nerves, and we're going to start talking about this. But in the beginning, I'm going to give you first. I will talk about some terminology that we will use in the spinal cord. But that as we are talking about the spinal cord, the one that connects the spinal cord and the brain, I'm going to remind you some terminology, and then we move into each one of those components of the brainstem and the reticular formation. Okay, the first term that I want that we don't get confused is about what is a nucleus, but what is an disorder, the plural nuclei in the central nervous system. Why? Because in chemistry we have talked about nuclei, we have talked about nucleus in terms of chemistry, about the center of the atoms that have neutrons and protons. Yeah, here in the nervous system, we're not talking about this one. Yeah, this is correct, and we talk about that in the beginning of the semester, but this is not the nuclei that we are going to talk about. We also talk about nucleus in cell biology. We also talk about that in the beginning of the semester in terms of the part of the cell that is where the DNA is located. Yeah, here in the central nervous system, we are not talking about that. In the central nervous system, we are talking about that in the brain, in the central nervous system, we're going to have a collection of neurons that have a function. Yeah, so for example, here, these will represent a nuclei and they have a specific function. Okay, so this, remember, in the central nervous system and neuroanatomy, when we talk about nuclei, we talk about a collection of neurons. So remember, the definition that you have in chemistry is correct, but is different from the one that we discuss in this chapter when they talk about nuclei. Also, there is a definition in cell biology, but that one is different. The one that we're going to use is the one that is in neuroanatomy. And in the central nervous system, a nucleus is a localized center of function. Yeah, so we are going to talk about different nuclei. So nuclei for respiration, for audition. We're going to talk about different type of those. So send places where there is a lot of neurons, the cell body of neurons, yeah, that are in charge of a specific function. And this is in the central nervous system. In the peripheral nervous system, when we talk about a cluster of neurons, so a similar terminology is referred as ganglion. Okay, so remember here, central nervous system, nucleus, peripheral nervous system, it will be ganglion. Okay, so now we're going to talk about the second term that I think is very important, that is tracks in both in the nervous system, and they will differ in the peripheral and the central nervous system, slightly in the terminology, but let me explain what it is, and then we can show you the difference. So here you see a track that is a bundle of accents. You see many accents here that are surrounded here by this envelope of connective tissue, and that the main function is sending a message. Yeah, so Here you have uh, the first type of tracks that are ascending tracks. So, for example, you burn your hand, that information travel using neurons. Yeah, all these accents, all this bundle of accents arrive to the spinal cord. They move to the brain, and this is through sensory information. The second step is the second type of tracks that are the descending tracks that go from the brain to the spinal cord, and this motor information said to do your hand move away. Okay, so far I have told you that there are two types of tracks that are the ascending ones, yeah, and the descending ones. And I show you that, for example, when you have a nerve impulse, yeah, like the pain, you can have that go from the body to the spinal cord and brain, and the motor information will go in the opposite direction. But just as a reminder, what is a track? A track in the central nervous system, and we will talk in more detail later, are bundles of accents, and those are called tracks. And how we name them? Pretty easy. We name them according to their origination and termination. So let me give you an example. We have one that is called the corticospinal. So cortical means cortex, and so cortex of the brain, and spinal is just the spinal cord. And so those fibers, those bundles of axons, run from the cerebral cortex in the brain to the spinal cord. And this is why it has that name. Okay, so now let's talk about the difference between these different names in the peripheral nervous system and in the central nervous system. So remember, in the peripheral nervous system, this bundle of axons are called nerves, while in the central nervous system they are called tracts. So the terminology of this bundle of axons differ depending on the location. And here you can see again the bundle of axons that are surrounded by these myelin covers. They have arteries here, they have connective tissue. So in those things they will be similar. Yeah, so both are enclosed bundle of axons, both carry information, and they have arteries and veins. However, if they are in the peripheral nervous system or in the central nervous system, they have different names. And let me show you an example in the following slide. So remember, this is an example that shows you that the nerves are in the peripheral nervous system and the tracts in the central nervous system. And here you have eyes, yeah, and here you have the brain, and the optic nerves and the optic tracts. So uh, in both cases, you have axons that they are projected from the retina into the brain. However, the ones that are leaving the eye, they are called optic nerves and they belong to the peripheral nervous system. The ones that are going to go inside the cranium, they are going to be called optic tracts and they belong to the central nervous system. In addition to that, if you see here, this area, you see an X-shaped structure, and this X-shaped structure is called the optic chiasma, and is the place where the nerves of both hemispheres cross. And it's important, if there is a disruption in that section, you can be blind or have a blurry vision, and that is the region where the two nerves cross, as I said before. So remember, I told you that here in this example you can see the optic nerves as the ones that are leaving the eyes. You can see the optic tract, the ones that are, you call them as they are inside of the cranium. However, uh, when you see the crossing, the specific place that is the optic chiasma, the names are changing, but they are the same axons. Okay, so remember, one belongs to the peripheral nervous system, the other one belongs to the central nervous system. So to summarize, I talk about two structures. Yeah, one that is a group of neuron cell bodies, and the other one that is a bundle of axons. So the group of neuron cell bodies, for example, the gray matter, if they are in the central nervous system and in the peripheral nervous system, they have different names. So in the central nervous system, the neuron cell bodies, they're going to be called nucleus, while in the peripheral nervous system, they're going to call ganglion. And the bundle of axons in the central nervous system, they're going to be called tracts, and they are going to be called nerves in the peripheral nervous system. Now that we finish with all this terminology, we can focus now in understanding the principal parts of the brain anatomy. And here, this will be just an overview. There are so many components, so I'm going to just give you a very general idea, and I'm going to start doing that by talking about the four major components. And the first component that I wanted to show you here is the cerebrum. So here is the first one that I wanted to show you, the cerebrum. That is the largest part of the brain. Then let's move into the second one here, that is posterior. If you remember, posterior to the number 3, to the pink one, and the number 2, let's write here 2, here let's write 1. So number 2 will be cerebellum. Yeah, now the pink region, the one here is called brainstem, and if you see, it's divided in 3 main regions. And finally, in blue, the fourth region that you see here in the center is called the encephalon. Okay, so let's recap. I told you there are 4 main regions, 4 main parts in the brain. First one, the largest, is the cerebrum. Second is the cerebellum, that is posterior to the pink one, that is the brainstem. Third one, the brainstem, that is a continuation of the spinal cord and is subdivided in 3 main regions. First one, medulla or medulla oblongata, as you want to call it, pons, or midbrain. So you have here 3 subdivisions in the brainstem, and we will talk about that in a second. And the fourth section in the center, that is superior to the brainstem, you will find the diencephalon, that is also divided into 3 more regions. So here, let's put 3.1. Yeah, we find here the midbrain, and so the midbrain, this is a very poor subdivision, but let's suppose that it's like this. So this will be, and if I can make an M, okay, so I think my pen is not working, but imagine that there is an M. The second one, 3.2, 3.2 is pons, and the pons go below, go inferior. Yeah, 3.2 pons. So again, suppose that is here. So pons here, here midbrain, and later in the schematics we will show it much clearer. And finally, 3.3 is the medulla oblongata, that it will be all this area. Okay, so here medulla oblongata, or medulla, and of course 11 will be the spinal cord that is coming from there. Finally, the diencephalon, if you remember. Okay, here 4.1, 4.2, and 4.3. We are going to have first the thalamus. Second, below the thalamus, we will have the hypothalamus. And surrounding the thalamus, we will have the pineal gland, or is a part of the epithalamus. Okay, later we will go and study all these 3 and 4 regions in more detail. Now, what I want is that I show you this in a schematic later. In the following slide, I want to show you a real picture, and I want that you identify it so you practice all the things that we just talked in this slide. So let's go to the next slide and let's practice. Okay, now to practice, if you want, you can stop the video and try to write all the names. If not, I will just give you the names right now. So number first, the largest part of the brain is the cerebrum. Then number two, here posterior to the brainstem, we will have the cerebellum. Here you see starting the third part, yeah, you have here the spinal cord that it will be the continue and it will continue with the brain stem, and number four in the middle or of the brain, and on top or superior to the brain stem you will have the diencephalon. Now let's see the different subdivisions of the brain stem. So first here you have the midbrain, later below the midbrain, if you remember, it's the pons. And finally, below the pons, you will have the medulla or medulla oblongata. In the diencephalon, we are just going to show you two, thalamus and hypothalamus. And later, in more detail, we will show you the hypothalamus later with a better picture. Okay, so with this, now we can start moving into another picture that here is shown in your textbook. But in that one, I'm not going to do the same exercise. I just want to show you that depending on the view, you can see some things, and in other ones, you can see others, other type of structures. So here you can see a different view of the brain, as it's not a sagittal brain. You cannot see the diencephalon. You only see the cerebrum, the cerebellum, the brainstem with all the components, and as I said, the diencephalon is more difficult to see here. Yeah, you have to dissect and make an imaginary line to see that area. However, here you can see other things, and this is something a constant you will see in your textbook, that they will show you things from different aspects. So here, for example, we will talk about the spinal cord, and if you see, we are going to talk about what happened with the gray and the white matter when it goes into goes from the spinal cord into the brainstem. We are going to talk about different components of or that different structural components that you will see there. In addition, we can see the different tracks that now I'm sure that you remember all the tracks, the difference between tracks and nuclei. And so we're going to start moving and start with not with the cerebrum. We're going to start with the brainstem because it's the first section, the continuation of the spinal cord. Yeah, so let's start with the brainstem. So as I said, we are going to start with the closest to the spinal cord, that is the brainstem, and the closest of the parts of the brainstem to the spinal cord is the medulla oblongata. You can see it here. In the textbook, they talk about the location, they talk about the structure, so we are going to give you not a complete detail of that. You can find all the information there. We'll also talk about the functions, and there will be so many functions. Yeah, so for example, the heartbeat is regulated by the medulla oblongata in collaboration with other structures of the brainstem, and the cerebellum, respiration, swallowing reflex, coughing reflex. There are a lot of things that are also involuntary that are involved, um, that are regulated by the brainstem. And also, finally, we're going to talk about the different nerves that are related to the medulla oblongata. So again, this is a lot of information, and you will find more detail in the textbook. And don't feel overwhelmed. You have the video and you can watch it multiple times, and you can also read the book if you want to go into more detail. So I already told you that the location of the medulla oblongata is in between the superior part of the spinal cord and the inferior part of the brainstem. In addition to that, if you approximately measure how long it is the medulla oblongata, it will be around 3 centimeters in adults. And I already told you that there is two keywords here in the structure that are tracks, that if you remember are axon bundles, many axons, and nuclei that are um, cell bodies of neurons, a collection of cell bodies of neurons that have a particular function. So what you will find here is a lot of gray matter nuclei and white matter tracks. Okay, so this section of the brainstem has some particularity in the location of the gray matter and the white matter that I'm going to show you. Yes, we're going to have a brief recap so you understand much better what is the function of this section of the brainstem. So you can look into this information in more detail in your textbook. However, here I just wanted to remind you that when you compare the brain and the spinal cord, the location of the gray matter and white matter are opposite. So when you see the spinal cord here and you see this section, they did this transverse plane, this imaginary line there, and they cut it. So here you find the gray area is inside, and the white area, it will be out. So you will find gray matter inside, white matter outside. And now when we go and study the brain, and here if you see they had a frontal plane cut, so here we don't see the brainstem, we don't see a cerebellum, but we see this part of the cerebrum. But it's the same idea in the brain, so that you find the gray matter out, so it's the opposite, and the white matter in. Okay, so they switch. And here, if you see in gray matter, in addition to that, you see here all these areas inside. So, well, here we said that there is the cortex and that you have gray matter there. In addition to that, you have gray matter inside in this area, and here is where you find the nuclei. You remember the nuclei, all these neurons, bodies, all these that are having a particular function. Good. So now what you have in the white matter is the axon. So you remember, so they come from here. It's a bundle of axons that we talked in the beginning, and they have a particular function. So for example, vision, so they come from there, and there will be other tracks, other axons that come here, I don't know, related to cognition, and there will be another one related to vision, and you have all these tracks coming together. Okay, so what I just told you here is that the location of the white and gray matter are different in the spinal cord and in the brain because they have different function. And I connected with the idea of nuclei, that are the somas. You remember the cell body, a collection of the cell bodies, and the tracks that are the bundle of axons. So in the brain, let me have this. In the brain, you have a gray matter and represent around 40%. And remember that the gray matter contain the neuronal bodies. So as I told you before, and those ones will form these nuclei that we were talking. And they fully develop once the person reaches his 20s. And those areas are the ones that conduct, process, and send information to various parts of the body. On the other hand, the white matter, is going to do something different. It's represent around 60% of the brain, and is made up of bundles that connect various areas. So I show you all these bundles, all these tracks of axons, and they develop through the 20s and peaks in the middle age. age, so it developed later. And this one is in charge of interpreting sensory information from various parts of the body. So they have definitely two different functions. Okay, so now let's see what happened with the gray matter and the white matter in the medulla oblongata. So again, the same idea. Here now, in addition to the spinal cord and the cerebrum, now we have the lower part of the medulla. So the most likely is that it looks very similar to the spinal cord. And here, if you remember the nuclei, yeah, all these are nuclei, they will be gray matter. Yeah, so if you look at the where is located them, I'm going to highlight it here. So are all of these one. So they will be inside, inside, inside. So similar to here, all of these one are inside. And here in yellow, I'm going to put the white matter. And if you see, are all the tracks. And the tracks also will look very similar. Yeah, they will be outside. And here, outside, 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 and outside. Okay, so in the you will see a transition in the changing of the location of the gray matter and the white matter. In the bottom part of the medulla oblongata, you will see that it still looks like the spinal cord. So here you find another diagram taken from your textbook. In the following slide, we're going to start looking at each one of these parts, and we're going to highlight the most important ones. But so far, I told you already the location of the medulla oblongata, inferior part of the brainstem. I also told you the structure, that we have white plus gray matter, and that when we make a cut in this lower part, the location, the distribution of this will look very similar to the spinal cord. So there should be a change in the brainstem of the location of the white and the gray matter. But I told you that the white matter has tracks. And if you remember in the beginning in the terminology, I told you that there were two type of tracks. And here you can see them. So that the medulla oblongata has sensory tracks, yeah, contain those two type of tracks, and also contain motor tracks. And the uh, sensory tracks, as we talked in the previous slide, they are form of white matter, yeah, and they are ascending, while the motor tracks, they are also formed with white matter, but they are descending and they extend between the spinal cord and other parts of the brain. So here we have all the names of the diagrams, and more than telling you, you need to remember all of this information. What I wanted to show you is that I already gave you the basis to understand what is happening here. So for example, here you have the four ventricle. So we already studied what are ventricles, and they are filled of the cerebral spinal fluid, and here you have the structure that produces the cerebral spinal fluid, that is the choroid plexus. Here you see that there are one, two, and three nucleus. So all of these ones, nucleus, nucleus, and nucleus. So if you remember, these nuclei are collections of somas, of neurons that have a specific function. And attached to that, you see that they have, yeah, these yellow areas that are nerves. Yeah, so here you find another nerves, and they have a specific names. In addition to that, we already talked also, oh, here there is another nerve that goes, and if you remember, they're from the peripheral nervous system. And in addition to have nerves, we have also in the central nervous system, yeah, other bundles of axons, and in those one are called tracks. So here you have tracks. So here go from the from the cortex to the spinal area. Yeah, you can see it here. So here we have again more axons going away from the brain. Okay, so if you see, there is a lot of things, a lot of names that I don't think that right now are important. Later we will memorize some things, but I wanted that you give the stay with the big picture, that there are a lot of things that you already know and they're the specific. We will understand them, memorize them later. Okay, so here I'm going to show you the cranial nerves and the structures that are important to remember from this structure, from the medulla oblongata that appear in your textbook. In your textbook they go into more detail, but I'm not going to go into so much detail. So in the medulla oblongata, you will find out of 12 of the 12 cranial nerves, and there are some that you will see in this schematic and other ones that you will not see. So for example, here, this one, you will not be able to see it from this transverse section of the medulla oblongata uh, or the anterior surface. You will not be able to see it. You will have to see it here. You have to turn it and you will see it here. However, the epiglottal is here, that is the nerve number 12, and here the vagus nerve is here, number 10. In addition to that, we have several structures here that we can talk about it. We're going to focus on two. So two structural regions. The first one, it will be the pyramids, and the second one will be the inferior olivary nuclei. So here the pyramids will be located here, and the inferior olivary nuclei are located here. Okay, so let me show you in detail, or not into a lot of detail, but I will have a slide for the different cranial nerves and another slide for explaining a little bit about the pyramids and the inferior olivary nuclei. So far I have told you about the location and also about the structure of the medulla oblongata. Now I'm going to talk about the function, and to do that I want to talk about these five cranial nerves and each one of the functions. But I just want to remind you that this is only 3 centimeters. So despite this very small size, the medulla oblongata has many important roles, and one of them is receiving and sending information from the spinal cord to the brain. So it's a fundamental structure there that allows the connection between these two areas of the central nervous system. So in the following slides, I'm going to talk about each one of these five cranial nerves. And I'm going to go very general. In your textbook, there is more information, but I don't want to overextend in this section. So in this slide, I'm going to show you the function of the nerve 8 and 9. So in the vestibulocochlear, that is the nerve 8, it conveys impulses related to the hearing, while the nerve 9, the glossopharyngeal, is related to impulses of taste, swallowing, and salivation. So here we're going to talk about the number 11 and number 10 cranial nerves. So the vagus nerve is involved in promoter motor responses for different structures like the pharynx, larynx, and many thoracic and abdominal organs. So some of the main functions are related to controlling the heartbeat, digestion, and the immune system. The accessory nerve, they, for example, control the swelling via the vagus nerve. And finally, the nerve number 12 is the hypoglossal, that this one regulates the tongue movement during speech and also regulate the swallowing. Again, I'm trying to summarize as much as possible to tell you the function. In your textbook, you will find much more information. So to finish with the functions, I told you that 5 of the 12 cranial nerves are in the medulla oblongata, and those nerves connect to several nuclei. So if you read your textbook, you will find that these nuclei are, for example, the center, the cardiovascular center. In other words, They regulate the heartbeat and the blood vessel diameter. You also have nuclei that are the center for respiratory functions. So here you will regulate the breathing. And if you read the textbook in detail, they will tell you there are different centers. So centers for uh, reflex that don't depend on you, that are non-voluntary, like swallowing reflex, like coughing, sneezing, and other ones. So to summarize, remember that the medulla oblongata is very important and is termed the vital center for life and is critical, for example, in the involvement of cardiovascular and respiratory control. And it also manages other automatic process that you don't have to think about it, such as uh, coughing, sneezing, swallowing, vomiting, and balance. So we already talked about the location of the medulla oblongata, the structure, and also the function of the cranial nerves. Now we're going to focus on two main regions, that structural regions that your textbook cover. One of them is the pyramids, and those are just these large protrusions that are motor tracts that are very important. You can see here the corticospinal tracts that are bundle of axons, and they are very important because they control voluntary movements of the limbs and trunk. And if you see here below in the green area, you can see that they cross. Yeah, the decussation of the pyramids produce a crossover of information that I will tell you a little bit more in the following slide. So the only thing that you need to remember from this slide is that these pyramids are a structural region that are protrusion formed by the large corticospinal tracts, and that the function of the corticospinal tract is in charge of voluntary movements of limbs and trunk. And here you see that those tracks are going to cross over in a structure called the decussation of pyramids. To explain the importance of this decussation of the pyramids, I'm going to make a diagram of a human being. So you know that humans have a left hemisphere, and that left hemisphere is in charge of controlling the voluntary movement of the opposite side of the body. So you know all these limbs, yeah, and sensory organs of the right side is controlled by the left side, and the right hemisphere is controlled by the opposite side, yeah, or is controlling the opposite side, that is the left limbs, left legs, eyes, sensory organs. And why this happening? Because of the decussation, because of this crossover of information. So remember, just superior to the junction of the medulla with the spinal cord. So in this area in blue, you will have a crossover of information. So you will see that 90% of the axons in the left pyramid will move to the right, and 90% that they are in the right pyramid, so here, they will move to the left. So they will move here. And due to this crossing that is called the decussation of pyramids, is that the brain controls the opposite sides of the body. So final region that I'm going to talk is the inferior olivary nuclei, and this region is located here. Yeah, so these are the inferior olivary nuclei. Of course, they are located in the lower part of a structure that have an oval shape. Yeah, that is called an olive. And why I wanted to talk about this one, because we have been talking that the medulla oblongata, it connects the cerebrum with the spinal cord, and we talk about all these pyramids. And so in addition to that, there is another function. So the inferior olivary nuclei is in charge of connecting the cortex with the cerebellum. And in this case, this area is responsible for learning new uh, motor skills. So just to recap, I told you that there is something called inferior olivary nuclei, and they are located just close to the pyramids, yeah, lateral to the pyramids in a structure that looked like an olive. And in the inferior region, you will have a group of neurons that they control the activity of the cerebellum neurons, and they allow you to learn new motor skills. And so they receive information from the cortex, yeah, of the brain, and instead of sending it to the spinal cord, that is generally what we have been talking, they send it to the cerebellum. Okay, so with this, we've finished the medulla oblongata, and now we're going to move into the other part of the brainstem.